Hi. Today we're going to have a look at AutoCAD, and we're going to have a look at it from the very basics, and we're basically just going to work our way through. So today's video is going to start off looking at some of the very simple tools and how you actually open up and get going with AutoCAD. So here we have AutoCAD, and this is the 2016 version, which means I'm living in the future because it's still only 2015. But AutoCAD do bring out the version a year ahead. Now this is new. This is called the welcome screen or the start screen, and you'll notice that it has its own separate tag along the top here, and it does make things a little bit easier. You'll see down here a list of various things which are the recent documents we worked on, which makes it quite handy. Over here we have the option to start a new drawing or to open from a file. Over on the right, this is just an advert for Autodesk, and it may come up with various different things, but they have the option to change them. Another way of making a new drawing is just to click on the plus button for the tags up the top here. It works exactly the same. If I just click down there, it opens up a new drawing with the default settings rather than going to File and New, when you have the option to actually choose the settings that you want. So if I go up here, say File, if I say New, a new drawing, it then comes up and asks me what options I want, so based on which template, and I can choose to open with or without the templates. Okay, so just clicking on that new from the start screen, that will open it up with your default settings, as will just clicking on the plus up here. Okay, so now we've got our new drawing. Let's start off looking at some of the tools. Now, before we do that, I'll just give you a quick tour around the screen. So at the top here, this is our application button, which effectively works like the file menu. It's where you open, save, create new, print, plot, all those kind of things. This is also where you have your options for changing the various different settings, the way you'd like AutoCAD to work. If I click on there, you'll see this is actually a very complex options box that comes up, variety of different tags along the top, and a huge amount of changes you can make. Really, we're just going to leave it as it is for now, but do be aware that that's where it is. It's under your application button. Running along the top there, we have our quick access toolbar, which is buttons that will, or commands that will always be visible irrespective of which ribbon we're on. Now the good thing about that is you can choose a button, you can right click on it and add to the quick access toolbar, and that will now add the button onto the quick access toolbar. So if you find something that you're using frequently when you're using AutoCAD, just add it onto your quick access toolbar, and then you don't have to remember which ribbon it's on and keep changing ribbons to find the command. Although actually anyone who uses AutoCAD at an advanced level knows that you just simply type the commands in anyway. If you want to take a button off your quick access toolbar, all you simply do is right click on it there, remove from quick access toolbar. You can also click on this drop down here. There's a few extras that you can just add on, the ones that are ticked are already on, and you can also go to more commands, and the more commands will bring up a dialog box which asks you which commands you actually want to add. So you can actually choose from the commands list which command you want added on, and there's quite a few there. As I said though, it's of limited use in AutoCAD because they have such a good way of typing in the commands anyway and accessing them, unlike using Word or Excel. Okay, below there obviously we have the ribbons. Each one has its own tag, and they're split into reasonably organized formats. Some of them you'll use, some of them I suggest you'll probably stay in the home ribbon for most of what you're going to do, certainly at the basic level. Below there we have different sheet tabs, so these are showing which actual file I'm working on. So there's the start menu again, and that will stay there now in the new versions irrespective of other drawings you have open. You notice the other drawings, if you have multiple drawings open, they will have a little X on there, and that's how you can actually close down individual drawings. You'll notice also the start ribbon doesn't have one. In other words, that will always be there. You can have more than one drawing open at a time, so if you keep clicking on the plus, you'll keep opening extra drawings, and you can close one down, and if you haven't made any changes to it, it will just close immediately. If you have made changes to it, it'll prompt you to save it, so that's a little safety measure there. Down below the tags, you see the work screen, or the space, for the current tab, in other words the one that you're working on. So it is important to just have a look up here and see which tag is highlighted, because that's the drawing that you're actually working on if you are working with multiple drawings. This area here shows a grid pattern. If I roll the wheel forwards, I zoom in. If I roll the wheel backwards, and this is the wheel on the mouse, then I zoom out. If I click with the wheel and move it around, I can actually pan my drawing around the screen. Okay, we'll have a look at those sort of moving around zoom commands later on. On the right hand side, this is the view cube, and below there we have some more viewing commands. Now these we're not going to use just yet. These are predominantly used when you're doing 3D drawings, so we're not going to worry about them, but just be aware that they are there. You can close them, we're not going to bother. At the bottom of our workspace we have a command line. Now we used to have a command bar down the bottom which is 3 lines. They've reduced this down to a single line. However, when you type a command in, it will appear immediately above. So this will expand upwards, and then after a few seconds it will fade down. So basically it's not intrusive into your drawing unless you want it to. You also have the option to click on the right hand side and it will come up with a list of all the different commands that you've typed in, and you can scroll up and down this list to see what you've done within a drawing. There are some settings for this command line down here as well, and you can choose to close it. However, I've certainly yet to come across somebody who finds it useful to actually turn that off. Down the bottom of the workspace we have our various different layouts for the workspace, which you can think of as page views for printing. And on the far left, this is the one we're actually in at the moment. This is our model space, which is our working area, which shows every single thing that we draw. The layouts, like I say, it looks like a sheet of paper, and in this window here, so if I double click there, you see I get a thick line around it. Now this is viewing my model space, and I can zoom in and out of the model space. If I double click outside of that viewport, I'm now looking at the sheet of paper, and you'll notice down here it now says paper space, and if I scroll out or in, I'm zooming in and out of the sheet of paper, not in this viewport. Okay, we'll look at this in much more detail when we go on to printing in a later video. Back to the model space. This is where I suggest you always start with working, certainly at a basic level. Down here we're going to have a look at these icons at the bottom. We're not going to have a look at them all, we're just going to have a look and see how they actually work and what they do. First one on the left there, that's showing the model space, and it's telling us whether we're working in model space or paper space. This is relevant mostly when you're working on layouts, and you see how now it says we're working on paper space, and that means if I zoom out or in, it's going to zoom in or out the sheet of paper. But if I double click inside a viewport, you notice I get the thick black line around the outside, and now it says I'm working in model space, which means if I zoom in or out, I'm zooming in and out within my drawing itself, in other words, in my model space. If I go back to model space, it always says model space there. Okay. Moving along, I have the option for grid, and if I just click on there, you'll see how the grid turns on and off. Next one, I have my snap mode, and this is specifically snap to grid, and you'll notice that that's in this section here. So this is my snapping to the grid. Unless you're drawing Lego blocks, I suggest you turn that off, because there's no point having it snapping to this grid. We actually want it to snap to other objects in the drawing, or to specific sizes, whereby we'll type in the size that we want it to snap to. The next button along is the orthogonal button for ortho mode. I don't use this because actually nowadays there's very little need to use ortho, because we can, if we're going to go to the trouble of doing that, why not just draw it in 3D? The 3D commands are so simple that it's better to draw it in plan and then go straight to 3D rather than fiddling with ortho mode. There are still a fair number of people who do use ortho mode, particularly architects, particularly people preparing for presentation. However, most of them simply haven't looked at the 3D options in enough detail to see how much time it will save them. Next one along, This is our polar tracking, and I suggest you always have this turned on. What this does is when you're rotating round to do angles, it will snap to preset angles. Now if I click on the drop down arrow, you'll see the angles that it's preset to snap to. So this is increments of 90 degrees. I could set it to increments of 45 degrees, 30 degrees, 23, or actually 22.5, and so on. Next one along, isometric. So if we're working in ortho, we might want to have isometric drafting on or off. I don't use this. Next one along, snapping to reference lines. Yes, definitely want this, and we'll see again in a later video how this works. Snapping to 2D reference points, absolutely essential. Let's have a look and see what reference points we can snap to. This is what used to be called the object snap, or OSnap. When we have an object drawn on the screen, it has endpoints. It also has a midpoint for a line. Yep, so we can actually snap to the midpoint of the line. For circles and ellipses, we have centers. For rectangular shapes, we have a geometric center. We also have nodes, quadrants, intersections. They're all fairly self-explanatory. Do have a look at these if you're trying to snap a subsequent object that you're drawing onto a previous object. Make sure that you have the correct snaps turned on. The midpoint is the one that may be turned off by default, so do just have a check of that and just simply click on it to make sure they're turned on. Yeah. There used to be the option down here to show the words rather than just the icons, so you could either show the words or the icons. It appears they've taken that option off, so you're now going to have to get used to what the icons mean. So that there is probably certainly one of the most important of these buttons there. So it's one square shape with a point, a snap point in the corner. Click on the arrow next to it just to see how these things come up. You can also click on the object snap settings option at the bottom, and what this will do is it will actually bring up the options for all of these bars down here, so you can actually just go through and change all of the options. Probably a good idea to turn off the 3D object snap at the moment. Dynamic input, yes, you absolutely want this turned on. Yeah. OK, click OK, leave it like that. As I say, I'm not going to go through the rest of them. Some of these are to do with annotations, zooms, scales, things like that. We will look at them when relevant. So here we have a section of tools to do with creating new objects. So this is where we're drawing, we're creating new objects. The next group along here is to do with modifying. So we're taking something that's already on the screen and we're going to change it or modify it slightly. So it's fairly easy to know which one of these you want to go into, depending on what it is you want to do. You'll notice also at the bottom that we have a drop down here which will show more drawing tools, and if we want this drop down to stay visible, because you'll notice if I move away from it, it disappears. If we want it to stay visible, we can pin it open, and now when I move away it stays pinned open. Now actually these are the most commonly used drawing tools, and these are some probably quite rarely used drawing tools, certainly at the basic level, so we'll leave that unpinned for now, and we're going to start off with the line tool. So what I get is I get the option to specify the first point. Now what we need to do is read what it's saying down here. So if I just click on the screen, it's taken the first point, and now it's asking me to specify the next point. So I can go across here, and you notice how it's snapping to polar, and that's the 90 degrees that we were talking about. Now what this means is as I go over one of those 90-degree increments, I can go slightly off it and it stays locked to the 90, so it makes it much easier to get it to 90. When I'm on 90, and it doesn't matter how far away I go, I can just type in the amount that I want, so let's say 100, and press enter, and that has now moved or drawn a first line which is 100 long. I can now go back to polar and I can say, well, I will now want to go 100 in the 90-degree angle, and then 100 back in the 180, And then I could say I want to now go 100 in the 270, which will take me back to my start point. But if you notice down here, on the command line, I also have the option for close. So let's try that one. And if I just press C and then enter, because the C here is in capital letters and in blue in this instance, C and enter will close the command. So that will finish the command for me. Okay, what we can do now is roll the wheel forward slightly just to zoom in a bit. Now each of these objects, when I hover over them, you'll notice that they each are drawn as an individual line. And what that means is if I just click on one, I'm just selecting that one line, not all of them at the same time. They're not joined together, they're simply snapped on, so the start of this line it joins onto the end of this line. There is a way, using the Polyline tool, that I can actually draw them as effectively a single line. So when I click down here, again, I'm going to go polar, 100, 100, and then do C at the end to end it. Now as you notice here, when I hover over one of these lines, just the line itself lights up. When I hover over this one, the entire shape lights up. And the reason is because that entire shape is a single object. It's a polyline object. In other words, the line just goes along here and simply turns at that point, whereas here the line goes along and then stops and then another line goes along. Of course, what I can do is I can modify this shape and I can say explode, and that breaks it into its component parts. Now what that means is now it behaves just like the other one. Yeah, so it's been broken into component parts. What I can also do is select, I hate that new option, select the entire shape, and if I go along to modify, and down here you see I have the option to join, yeah, and it's now converted back into a polyline. So it doesn't matter which way we create it in the first place, we can make it into the other one if we want to. So there I drew it as individual lines and turned it into a polyline. Here I could have drawn it as a polyline, click on explode to make it into individual line segments. Essentially what you need to do is whichever one is quicker when you're drawing. Okay, let's now move on to the circle tool. The circle tool, we don't just click on the circle up there, generally click on the drop down, because there may be various different elements that you have as predefined points which you might want to use. Now, center and radius, center and diameter, yes, generally speaking, if we have one, we can pretty much work out or we have the other. Let's just choose the center radius to see how it works. So the first point it's asking me for, and again, you must always read the command line to see what it's saying. It's asking me to specify the center point. If I click there, that's the center point. It's now asking me for the radius. So if I say 50, bearing in mind my lines here are 100, 50 radius should take it to exactly the midpoint there, which it does. On this one here, if I do my circle tool again, click on there, it doesn't matter which direction I drag this line out in, because it's a radius or a diameter. So if I now say 100, that will now go to the full size of that square that we drew. I just did Control Z there a couple of times, and you'll notice down here it came up saying the U circle group, which is undo. Effectively, Control Z undoes your last actions. Bear in mind, if you now repeat an action, the last thing you did was an undo, so it will do another undo action. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other options there. We could have 2 points. So this is 2 points that we have on a circle. So if I click on the first point, which is there, and then click on the second point, which is there. What this is actually doing is it's picking 2 points which oppose each other, running through the center of the circle. So there are 2 points on the arc of the circle running through the center point. So effectively, if you drew a diameter across the circle, the 2 points would be the end of that diameter line. So that may be what you have when you're drawing that circle. Next one along, a 3 point. Now this one doesn't actually require a diameter. So if I choose a point there, and a point there, and a point there, this is now 3 points that are touching, and it will fit the circle to those 3 points. So again, if I do Control Z, and if I just choose 3 random points over here, you'll see how it puts them and fits the circle to those 3 points that I clicked on. Now those are mostly what people use. However, we do have also tan radius. Now let's imagine that we wanted to touch that line there and to touch that line there with a radius of 25. That's what it does. So it's actually touching the top line and the bottom line. Effectively, it's taking the circle with a radius of 25 and it's pushing it into the corner with these 2 lines. Now the beautiful thing about working with tangents is it doesn't matter how our lines are going to intersect. So if I do the same command again, tan radius, if I choose that one as a tangent, that one as a tangent, and I now set my radius, and I'm going to use 50 this time, you'll see how it pushes the circle with a radius of 50 into until it touches both of those lines with the tangent there. That can be really useful. So let's have a look at that, taking it a stage further, because another thing we can do is the next option, which is 3 tangents rather than radius. So if I now say, well, one of my tangents is there, another is there, and another is there. Now it's put in a circle which is the biggest possible circle that will fit inside that shape, touching all 3 of those lines. That can be particularly useful when you're working with architectural stuff, when you want to size something up. Imagine we had a buffer area around something. We can see exactly how big that buffer area is around an object before we have obstacles around the edge. Okay, that's where we're going to leave today's lesson. In the next lesson we're going to come back and we'll carry on having a look at some of these other tools, in particular the rectangle tool. We're going to go through these and see how we can actually set them up to do some more interesting drawings. Okay, that's the first of the series. I hope you found it useful. Keep watching for more. I'm the Adobe Guy, and thank you for listening.